Henry Darger The Realms of the Unreal, Volume 1. Of the story of the Vivian girls in what is known as the Realms of the Unreal, of the Glendeco Angelinian war storm caused by the Child Slave Rebellion, 47 chapters, 10 volumes, written by H. J. Darger. This Volume 1 is completely finished and confirmed, and it stands confirmed as the writer and originator when it shall be confirmed. It shall not be duplicated. No one shall be allowed to make statements on the story saying it is a true fact, and nothing else shall be written in it or anything else on detail. Thereof, signed, H. J. Saunders, original writer. Total name of story, In the Realms of the Unreal. Descriptions about 70 of disasters and of the power and ways of great Blingominian creatures. Adventure with the powerful spies known as the Gemini. 27 other incidents, mostly with Blingominian creatures and also storms. 7 incidents during the outbreak of the war, seen in Chapter 1, Volume 1. Siege and battle at Crowley, seen in Chapter 2, Volume 1. Christian army under P. Constantinian Ehrenberg victorious and at the Second Battle of Crowley, called the 2 Battles of Cromore. Also seen in Chapter 2, Volume 1. Undecided conflicts, Eugene in a Jenny Wren town, Chapter 2, Volume 1. Tornado at Jenny Wren town, seen in Chapter 3, Volume 1. Great victory for Christian armies at Jenny Wren town, Battle of 3 days duration, seen in Chapter 3, Volume 1. Christian defeat at Pullaway and Angeline Agatha threatened, seen in second part of Chapter 3, Volume 1. Christian victory at Titanic Fiar, Chapter 3, Volume 1. Christian victory at the Battle of Titan River, seen in Chapter 3, Volume 1. General campaigns, Angelinian and other Christian armies, barely outwitted at the 3 days sanguinary battle of Snowflake Gap, seen in Chapter 3, Volume 1. Christian advance checked at the Battle of Beppo, seen in Chapter 3, Volume 1. Christian army under Ehrenberg worsted at the Battle of Popper Necklace, seen in Chapter 3, Volume 1. Christian advance delayed by battle at Clatterville, seen in Chapter 3, Volume 1. Kindernine's Christians' victory at the Battle of Henriota, seen in Chapter 3, also Volume 1. Christian captured the city of Oh My Onion Car Career Fominius' famous Fort Beehive after desperate battles, seen in Chapter 3, Volume 1. The story of the bravery of the Vivian girls, called Violet, and her sisters in The Reign of Terror, or the Great Glencoe Angelinian War. Introduction. This description of the Great War and its following results is perhaps the greatest ever written by an author on the line of any fabulous war that could ever be entitled. With such a name, the war lasted about years and 7 months in this story, and the author of this book has taken over 11 years in writing out the long and graphic details and has fought on from day to day in order to win for the Christ inside this long and bloody war. And though the Christians had been threatened with defeat on account of a strange Ehrenberg mystery which could not be solved by anyone, not even myself, they finally won when they turned the tide against the enemy at the frightful battle of Ehrenberg Run. The Ehrenberg mystery, as well as the murder of the Ehrenberg child, had threatened the doors of the 3 Christian states for the whole length of the great Glencoe-Angelinian War, and it was predicted that the solving of the Ehrenberg mystery, or for the revenge of her assassins, was the only hope for any chance of the Christian nation winning the war. Abiania managed to crush Glendoline herself, after Claverinia had been ruined, and almost destroyed, an Angelinian nation almost wiped out in her armies. By Henry Joseph Darger, the author of Thrilling Story. The scenes of this story, as its title indicates, lies among the nations of an unknown or imaginary world or countries, with our Earth as their moon, though there are two big islands belonging to Glandolinia that will form the shape of our lands. The names of these nations are Angelinia, Abyssincili, Protestantia, and Abiania, four great Catholic nations, there being no Protestant nations. Other Catholic nations, but rivals of Glandolinia, also are Mormonominia, Hecanile, Condominia, Glandolina, Spoonin, Cretorin, Madorin, Clinsinan, and Fructinia. Next to Abiana, Glandolinia is the most powerful of them all, and 3/4 of the population are as wickedness can be. There are scores of other nations, but their names are not given. The two nations, Glandolinia and Abiania, alone have in this story hundreds of thrillions of men, many thrillions of women and children. The names of the oceans are the same as the nations. This imaginary planet is 1,000 times as large as our own, and the largest body of water, known as the Angolinian Seas, could hold scores of our own worlds and still have room. Its near neighbor and the next largest ocean, called the Miwurthian Sea, is what is the Protestantian Ocean, on account of its heat waves sweeping into the cool Angelinian seas and drawing down upon its waters the colder atmosphere of the Calvarinian winters, is a most dangerous and fatal ocean, for typhoons which carry all before them, even in swooping the land, occur so frequently that no one dares travel on it during the typhoon seasons. The Angelinian seas also have frequently severe typhoons which havocs everything in an instant. Governor Hanson and his brother Governor Robert Angelic Vivian, with their two wives, brothers, and the little Vivian girls, are the main ones related in this story. The beautiful children are so pretty that could never be described. Before and during the war, as we will see as we proceed, these brave little girls passed through indescribable horrors, but their imprisonment at Calvarine and Andrian was the worst suffering which they experienced before the outbreak of the Great War. In this story, for more than 43 years, child slavery existed in the Calvarinian country. Hundreds of thousands of children, torn from their parents, were thrown into the horrible factories, made to work themselves to death without getting a cent, and horrors upon horrors almost equaled that of perdition. Abiania made 4 attempts to break this evil, in waging 4 wars with Glandolinia, and though successful in the war, did not completely stamp out this dreadful canker eating at the heart of the wicked nation. Before the Glando-Angelinian War broke out, Abiania was threatened to strike down the Glandolinian nation with one deliberate war, but other nations mediated until the danger of struggling with the foe was averted for only 2 weeks, and then bang, bang, as Angelinia drove in herself despite all mediators. The Fifth War, the War of 1841, was so successful for Abiania that she succeeded in freeing the Calvarinian nation from the powers of Glandolinia, but failed to have the desired effects of the child slave horrors. Smaller nations not named had been overthrown by Glandolinia. Millions of children alone had been carried off, and for 40 years the poor childly children had lain blood and bleeding in these Glandolinian child slave prisons of horror, imploring for help from bondage seemingly in vain. No slavery had been as cruel and shocking as this, and Angelina herself looked on in horror. But as long as Hanson or his brother did not make that threatened war with Glandolinia, nothing could be done. During the bloodiest war of 1843, the Calvarinian country succeeded to Angelinia and Abiania, and this brought the first serious trouble between Glandolinia and Abiania, which led to the destruction of the ship loaded with children and the king's wife and daughter, and which caused the king's death when he heard the news. At the same time, Abyssincili had desired to make a junction with Angelinia, and at this news, Glandolinia went mad and struck a blow against Abyssincili, but Abiania in the War of 1841 put a stop to her folly. Only 2 years later, after the Great War was over, the child slavery, which had only slackened only was renewed and expanded so rapidly that the councils rushed orders for the crushing of that worst of evils, and so war was declared, and Calvernia invaded, the foe driven out, and their own Catrai invaded by the Abianians, and the wicked nation brought to her knees. Some of the most terrible things in the first part of the story are the ravages caused by the Glendo-Angelinian War and by typhoons of great and destructive force. Great heat waves moved northward across the Calvernian country and also the cool Angelinian seas. And as it swoops into the atmosphere of the Angelinian seas, the hot tropical sun causes the lower layers of air to expand, while lifting the upper layers like a great gaseous chute at the same time. The lifted gas then spreads uniformly outward in all directions, thus causing the heated area to become one of low pressure, while the surrounding area has its pressure increased. An ascent of air from an lifted area causes an uprush, which forces a local chimney from a limited area, forces a local chimney through the upper at rates it contains, becomes condensed, thus liberating as heat, a large amount of energy which has been previously stored up in the process of evaporation. In turn, this still rarefies the ascending current so that the draft is strengthened. Warm vapor-laden air blows in from all sides of the bottom to supply the partial vacuum, and the current in moving at the center and rush past one another produce a whirling motion, which is increased by the additional new volumes of light air, which is condensed into clouds. They're spread outward in the upper regions, and the control area become quickly through some mysterious cause one immense suction, which increases in violence, the motion becoming more spiral, being now more than overcome by suction into the great roaring vortex. Motion around the center develops a stronger vacuum with the greatest violence in its immense stem of 1,000-mile funnel, which the layers of cloud spread far from the whirling storm brings upon the region not struck by the cyclonic wind. Fearful cloud bursts and floods, which commit almost as severe damage. This is the formation of the typhoons that sweep the Mauritian seas, in part, particularly in which tear thoroughway into the Calvernian seas and commit so much damage to the cities and towns and for forests along the shores of Abiania and Angelinia. Motion of this kind is called gyratory motion. Motion of this kind is called gyratory motion. The wind of the worst of these typhoons blow at a rate too high to be measured, but certainly 100 times the velocity of the wildest tornadoes. The violence of the vortex prostrates and sweeps away whole forests and devastates the strongest cities, raining waves on the Angelinian, Calvernian, and Mayworthian seas, thus overwhelm the largest ships and at times Swamslow Islands. On the advancing side of the typhoons, which are the wildest, there is very little rain or hail, but as a storm sweeps over the shore and land, the rain falls in blinding torrential chutes like torrents which are driven horizontally by the wind and broken into blinding spray, so that objects become invisible at a distance of 30 feet. Typhoons which threaten the Calvernian coast in winter, but which, fortunately, pass off many times, are nevertheless attended with the most blinding blizzard and snowstorms that could ever be described. Calvernian summers are long, and Calvernian winters are long. The winter and extremely cold at times, and mild at other times, but in all cases no winter passes without 40 great snowstorms every winter. Summer is so scorching that the millions of people unused to much climate move up to the north or into the Angelinian country to get far away from the terrific heat. The typhoons which traverse the Mauritian seas are defined as immense tornadoes of exceeding great violence, in which, unlike the tornado, the area covered by the whirl is too large for the gyration to be always determined by deflection due to their Earth's rotation. Different from the tornado in size, yet like the tornado, it quickly becomes extinct despite its size, but nevertheless travels an enormous distance despite the resistance it encounters from the surrounding air and the earth. The direction of its progress is generally northeastward, and the gyration motion it unites to the notion of the hand. The gyration motion is opposite to the motion of the hands of a watch. It is hard to determine when the typhoon forms, but they are known to show their terrifying appearance in the afternoons or evenings, though more occasionally during the typhoon seasons and more frequently in the Mauritian seas than the cold northern seas. There are snowstorms called Angelinian hurricanes, some storms called Angelinian hurricanes, which exceed over 10,000 miles in circumference, while the path of the whole typhoon storm outside of its whirling destructive motion is nearly 12,000 miles in width, its path of death and destruction being less than 2,000 miles, its greatest force being the extent of 1,000, and its greatest vacuum 100 miles. The centrifugal force developed in gyration so close to the axis is too enormous to be real, and the diminution of the atmospheric pressure at the main center is as much as to create a wild vacuum, whose tremendous roar could be heard for 2 hours before the wind strikes. Hence, when a typhoon of this sort passes over a city, the sudden expansion and onrush of air tears the houses to fragments in a very short time. The whirling mass of air around the extensive axis moves solid masses many thousands of tons in weight and scatters towns like chaff on either side of its path. The general formation of these typhoons are in line with the tornadoes but more quicker. Dark clouds meet from opposite sides of the sky in a headlong rush. Gyratory motion is established and warm air is drawn up into the vortex from below, while an ascending, twisting column of air spreads out spirally as it joins the clouds above. But as the storm progresses forward and grows larger, the cone-shaped cloud gets so large that it cannot be distinguished as the form of a dark whirling funnel, and as the motion increases in vocal and violence, nearly the entire funnel descends until it sweeps the sea. The column, when full grown, has a progressive motion that varies from 1,500 to 1,600 miles in 3 hours, but does not rise or descend at intervals like the American tornado, but sweeps on like the hurricane, while the rushing of the wildly conflicting elements produce a loud roaring around that can be heard at the distance of 40 miles before it strikes. There are also peculiar typhoons, which are generally nicknamed the peevish typhoons. These blow in different varies than the gyratorial typhoons, lasting only a brief time. One variety is somewhat like a terrific hurricane in its raging fury. These storms occurring any time of the year, having no general seasons whatever, but they are more frequently raging in March, April, May, June to December. From March to May, they carry their force in gyrational, their burst in a very few hours, carrying all before them like the typhoon at Jenny Wren Town before the great battle there. In the months of June to December, they have a center like the hurricane, a calm center like a hurricane. But during other months, when they become more violent, their center is but a few rod in width, and a rage like the tornado, carrying all before them. In this period, their fury is and their force is the great. Sorry, it's hard to read the page. Beginning, their approach is similar to that of a thunderstorm, but the clouds are more freakish and more denser, and the storm occasionally displays whirling funnels. They are generally mistaken as hurricanes, but the Angelinian hurricanes are very slight and only wreck weak structures. Typhoons of these kinds are considered as violent gyrotorals, which may have lost its greater force as they generally strike the Calverinian shores and Angelinian coast in the east. Of the main description concerning the so-called peevish typhoons is well to be related. They are really of different varieties and many varieties. One general variety, known as a Spirian, has 3 varieties. One variety, which is temporarily mild in fury, occurs only in the months of July and August, and this is the first variety, which blows in a similar way like the hurricane, but are far more violent and not quite so long. These hurricanes, like storms, are not so long, but the worst kind, which are described during and before the war, are worth noting. One of the most noted is the terrific typhoon at Jenny Wren Town before the battle occurred there. Never have these storms got anything called lulls. The first storm in Chapter 1 was also one of these kind, and the great typhoon that shipwrecked Governor Hanson and the rest at Calverinian was one of these storms, and another tore the city of Evangelista sometime before the Glendo Angevinian War, and one that swept the Angevinian coast late in the summer season of 1872. The most violent of these had in the summer season of 1872. The most violent of these had swept Jenny Wren Town and other cities, and another great one occurred during the inter-eastern season of 1840. There are three reasons why these typhoons get such names. They are gyratoral in motion. All three of the varieties are exceedingly violent and vehement in force and make such an indescribable clamor that nothing else can be heard. The second reason is because they make such an angry roar in its approach. The third reason is because of its sudden outburst. The first varieties are generally called hurricanes by the Angevinians, though that is not their proper name. Their character is notably different, their force much greater, and their approach swift and clamorous like the tornado. At the advancing side of these typhoons, the thunder, lightning, and rainfall is peculiarly violent, but at the rear portions of the storm, the rainfall is very violent, though there is very little thunder and lightning, and floods usually follow. These storms generally occur in the typhoon season, which is the month of September to April and May, though they have been known to appear in the other months as well. But in the months named, they are unusually and frequently more violent than ever imagined.